Another episode of Sermon Braindump. My name is Scott Dalen. I'm an ELCA pastor in Southwest Iowa, and I present these videos every week for a couple of different reasons. The first of which is to take my brain out of the mode of background work over the course of the week and move into the process of writing and preparing the sermon that I will preach to my congregation for the weekend. That is the first. The second is just to allow you, the viewer, who have graciously given up your time to come by and listen to me ramble, to gain some different insight into the assigned text for the week. So that is why I do these. And as I kick this one off, I want to say a special hello to Bill, who is a viewer who reached out to me this past week. I believe, if memory serves me correctly, this has been a few days, but I believe Bill was Episcopalian. But thanks for tuning in, Bill, and for reaching out. I appreciated hearing from you. That's why I do these videos, just to kind of tackle those different things, and this one is no different. This particular week, which is Sunday, January 20th, 2019, the second Sunday after Epiphany, our gospel lesson is coming out of John. It is John chapter 2, verses 1 through 11. Now, with the way that the Epiphany calendar has fallen so far, this is now our third week of Epiphany, because the day of Epiphany actually fell on Sunday 2 weeks ago. If you happen to catch my video for that, that doesn't always happen because that date is always the same. It's always January 6th. So we had that one, and with the day of Epiphany, that text is always the story of the Magi, which comes out of Matthew, and of course Jesus is still very young, a baby or toddler at that time. Then the first Sunday after Epiphany is always baptism of our Lord, and we hear one of the baptismal stories. This year we heard the one out of Luke, which makes sense because in the lectionary cycle that my congregation follows, we are in the year of Luke, so it makes sense that that would be the one that we have. This time around, we're into John. So with that, we are really finding very different perspectives that we continue to look at as this season of Epiphany continues, which I really kind of dig. It's kind of a interesting development in just the way the calendar and the various texts are going with us so far. Now, why do I bring this up? Well, I bring it up because it's important to remember that the four different gospels have different theological takes on things, different stances that they take, different opinions that seem to be expressed, and especially John when comparing that one with the other three. I think that's important because we will really see that on display as we think about, again, Epiphany and the season of Epiphany, in which our texts tend to share stories of ways that Jesus is revealed to the world. What is very prominent to me this time around is a switch that we've had. As I mentioned, first we had the story of the Magi out of Matthew when Jesus is still a baby, and then we had Jesus' baptism out of Luke, in which Jesus is very, very, very passive in that particular account. The action is seemingly really focused in on John the Baptist, and then the presence of the Holy Spirit coming down and the voice of God. Jesus doesn't actually say anything. Seems to be very passive within that one. This time around, polar opposite. Jesus is creating the action. Now, it's at the prodding of his mother Mary, which we'll hear when I read it, and yet Jesus is seemingly making the decision to take action in this miraculous event, which is actually the turning water into wine at Cana in Galilee, if I hadn't mentioned that yet. And we see that intentionality on the part of Jesus, that he is the one revealing his own glory. So with that, how about we read it, and then we'll kind of dive into it some more. John chapter 2, verses 1 through 11. On the third day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Side note, Mary is never named in John's gospel, which I think kind of like raises an eyebrow for me. And I wonder what Mary would have thought of that had she read John's gospel after it was written. Maybe she would have taken offense, like, hey, I didn't go through some crazy stuff and raise the one who would be the Christ, the Messiah, to have you just call me his mother. Now, granted, being the mother of God, the mother of Jesus, is a huge thing. I'm not negating that, and I'm saying that John kind of is, because just calls him Jesus, or her, Jesus' mother. Side note, we'll come back in. Okay. Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine gave out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." Jesus said to her, "Woman, what concern is that to you and to me? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Now standing there were 6 stone water jars for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. Jesus said to them, "Fill the jars with water," and they filled them up to the brim. He said to them, "Now draw some out and take it to the chief steward." So they took it. When the steward tasted the water that had become wine and did not know where it came from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew, the steward called the bridegroom and said to him, "Everyone serves the good wine first, and then the inferior wine after the guests have become drunk. But you have kept the good wine until now." Jesus did this, the first of his signs, in Cana of Galilee, and revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. All right, so that's the reading. So some different things going on here. A little background that's important. First off is thinking about a wedding celebration at that time. Now, when we have a wedding, usually we have the rehearsal and the dinner the night before, which is mainly for the families and the wedding party, and then the day of you have the wedding, and then the wedding reception goes on afterwards, and that's it. It's the whole thing, even though there's a lot of time leading up to it, is usually about a day and a half total, and the wedding ceremony itself is one day. But in this culture, weddings lasted a week. They were an extensive affair, and people would come and go, and yet it was an ongoing celebration for this newly married couple, this union of a newly married couple, and it was a big hospitality social faux pas for you to run out of supply for your guests, but yet that's exactly what's going on. So that's kind of a little bit of the background of what is happening here, that they've run out of wine for whatever reason. Maybe the host didn't plan well. I read one thing that said that there's a sense of almost a potluck type thing, that people bring food and they will bring wine as part of the celebration, and the fact that they're running out is actually an indication that maybe not many people showed up and brought stuff. Now, I've never heard that before. It's an interesting theory, but that's just one thing that I read. But regardless, they're running out of wine. And the oddball part here is that Mary takes action, or begins to take action. We don't know why, and that's kind of caught my attention. Why does Mary even care? Are they relatives? Cana was very close to Nazareth. They're only a few miles apart, a handful of miles apart, kind of communities that are around Galilee in the north of the Holy Land. But so they would have been close. It's possible that this family was a relation, and that's why they are there, and that's why Jesus was invited, and his disciples came with him as well. What we do know, disciple-wise, we're early on in John's gospel here, and we've heard about the encounter that Jesus initially had with Andrew, who then brought Peter, and then Philip, who brought Nathanael. Those are the only 4 that we've heard about so far. And in fact, that encounter happens right before this, literally right before this. And so that's a thing going on. Maybe it's only these 4 who have come with him. Maybe there's more around disciple-wise that came with Jesus. We don't really know. But they talk about on the 3rd day there was a wedding. Now, that could mean a couple of different things. And I've keyed into this as well. It's a question that I have that we don't really have a good answer to. It could be that the wedding happened, and it's on this 3rd day from whatever it is that John, the author, is talking about. It could be that this is the 3rd day of the wedding ceremony. Again, they last a week, so that's a possibility. There's ambiguity in there, and the original language doesn't really help us out very much. But that's something I wonder about. Like, well, is this pointing towards, is this a metaphor for the resurrection, that on the 3rd day when Jesus will rise again, there will be a celebration? Maybe. There's some other things in here too that I've thought about, and I wonder, okay, is this a metaphor for something else? Is this John, the author of the gospel, is John making some larger scale points here, what they call eschatological or Christological or Christological or various things of that nature? Is that going on? And the answer to that is maybe. But maybe it's as simple as there was a wedding and Jesus was there and he performed a miracle. And I think it could be both and. I'm not saying it's one and not the other. Maybe neither, maybe both. I don't know. And yet what happens? So again, as I mentioned before, Mary takes notice, and she kind of prods Jesus like, hey, they're out of wine. And he's kind of like, so we're not the host. What do we care? Which sometimes I think seems kind of rude. Like, is he just kind of bickering at his mom here? And yet he does listen to her. He does act as she asks him to. So what's going on here? Is there a little bit of like honoring your father and mother that's borderline getting broken by Jesus here? I don't know. I don't know. But there's this odd little tension, and then she tells the servants, do whatever he tells you. Now, that's what our translations now say. Again, not great translations. There's a little word in the Greek language, or the original Greek language, that makes it contingent. When you're working with translation software, it doesn't actually give a word translation for it, but it makes the statement a contingent one, therefore kind of turning it into almost like a question or a what if type situation. So whenever I'm doing it, I always put in if when I'm doing a translation myself. So a better translation of that phrase, at least in my opinion, is if he says anything to you, do it, is what Mary tells the servants. Well, and then Jesus does something. He sees these jars sitting there. Now, I was in Galilee, in Israel, last March, almost a year ago, and they have found what they believe to be one of these jars. Now, not the specific jar, but one of these jars for Jewish purification that would have, and they're huge. I think of a jar or a vase or whatever, like, a big jar, but they're enormous. The things stand like 4 or 5 feet tall, and equally wide. They're ginormous, and there's 6 of them sitting there. And Jesus says, fill them all the way to the top, and then take a little out and take it to the head of the servants, which they do, and it's become wine. And it's not only is it wine, it's the best wine. So what's happening here? And that's the big question. Now, this is the first of Jesus' signs. They call them signs in John. They're not miracles. They're signs, but they're miracles too. They're a miraculous power of God at work. And why does Jesus do it? Why does he choose this moment? He says, my hour has not yet come. Well, what does that mean? His hour comes actually with his crucifixion. So that's not till the end. But everything seems to point that way. Why does Jesus make the intentional choice, as we see, to reveal his glory, to do this sign and reveal his glory? It seems to be so that his disciples, whether it's the 4 that I mentioned earlier, or if it's all 12, or if it's everyone with them, or if it's everyone who's there at the wedding ceremony, although I don't think that's it, because it seems like many people don't know what's happening. They don't know that Jesus has done this, and yet those who witnessed it believe. We hear at the end of John's gospel that is why the gospel was written down, so that we may see, we're hear or read, and that we may come to believe. And that seems to be on point here. And then also at the beginning of John's gospel, in what they call the prologue, which is chapter 1, like the first 17 verses, there's a part where we hear that we have seen his glory. And as I think about that, well, why have we seen it? Because he chose to reveal it. Jesus is God, and God is Jesus. And they are separate but one at the same time. And yes, along with the Holy Spirit, triune God, mind-blowing. How do we explain it? I don't know. Side note. But because God has chosen to enter into our reality, the same God who made the world in the first place, which we hear back at the beginning of John chapter 1, has entered in, dwelled among us as one of us, and has made the choice both through the Christ event as a whole and through this one moment to reveal his glory to us so that we may come to believe. That's what's going on. And what's behind it? What is being revealed? What glory is being revealed? That we have a God who desires community, that we have a God that desires the joy of life lived together in relationship. One of my former professors and I were talking about this on Twitter yesterday. As a matter of fact, we're going back and forth, kind of talking about what's going on here. Is this, like I said before, is this John like being metaphorical, or is this just a wedding where something amazing happens? And it would seem that Jesus desires that, and not only that does Jesus like provide a bottle, Jesus provides in abundance. You know, it's the equivalent of upwards of like 160 bottles of wine, or maybe it's like 1,000 bottles of wine. It's a ton of wine, tons and tons and tons and tons of wine, so much wine, and it's the best that Jesus desires that, and so that's what's happening in this text, in this sign, in this miracle, in this first moment, as Jesus chooses to reveal himself to the world, or at least to this small group of people. Why does he do it? I don't know. But does it work? Yes, it does. We hear that the disciples believed in him, and we hear this sign and we believe as well. So that's what's happening. If you have thoughts, questions, comments, go ahead and throw it down in the comment section. We'll continue the conversation that way. Otherwise, I hope you have a blessed week. Maybe in light of a sermon and trying to explain things, maybe we'll all just sit around and drink wine together. How's that sound? Sound good? Maybe we'll do that. We'll catch you next time.